All right. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Thank you so much for joining us today for Indigenous Futurisms, Transcending Past, Present, and Future. My name is Camilla Brewer. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am the coordinator for the LGBTQIA Resource Center at Georgia Tech.
Hi, everyone. My name is Danny Lechner. I use she, her, and hers as my pronouns, and I'm the coordinator for the Women's Resource Center at Georgia Tech.
So again, thank you all so much for joining us today for our event and conversation. This event is part of our Context programming, which is a year-long interdisciplinary programming initiative that explores social justice themes and issues through the lens of race and class in Atlanta. With an emphasis on integrating creative, theoretical, and analytical approaches to education, this series offers opportunities to examine the intersections of systems that govern our everyday lives. Context programming provides a platform for inclusive conversation about the challenges of social justice across different issues that shape our communities and lives. Through sustained learning about social justice pedagogy and practice, our community will be able to engage in collective investment in transformative education that works towards Georgia Tech's mission of educating leaders who are dedicated to improving the human condition. This month, we are focusing on our historical and contemporary contextualization of land ownership as it relates to Native American and Indigenous communities. While discussing colonization of physical lands, we also intend to discuss the westernization and systematic erasure of people, traditions, languages, and histories.
So following this month's programming, January will examine the civil rights movement in Atlanta and explore some of the root causes to the movement and what led the city to its prominence for civil rights. Additionally, we will spotlight the legends and leaders from the past and then look at some of the new leaders from the current movements happening around the city today. I've also dropped in the chat a link to our Context webpage if you want to check out any more upcoming events or learn a little bit more about the programs. With that said, we have the distinct honor of welcoming Dr. Manuela Well-Off-Man. Dr. Well-Off-Man is an art historian and chief curator at the Institute of American Indian Arts, Museum of Contemporary Native Arts. She has more than 20 years of curatorial experience in museums and galleries. She has curated more than 46 exhibitions, including national and international traveling contemporary Native American arts exhibits. Dr. Well-Off-Man received a master's in art history, archaeology, and pedagogy, as well as a Ph.D. in art history. She lectures frequently on various topics of American art and authored numerous exhibition catalog essays, magazine articles, blogs, and scholarly texts. Today, she's going to be taking us through the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts virtual exhibit on Indigenous Futurisms, which is very exciting. Thank you, technology, for the ability for us to travel like this. So the exhibit is called Indigenous Futurisms, Transcending Past, Present, and Future. So without further ado, we're going to turn it over to Dr. Well-Off-Man.
Thank you so much for your nice introduction. I would like to talk about our institution first before we start our tour. So as you mentioned, I'm chief curator at the IAIA Museum of Contemporary Native Arts. And the Institute of American Indian Arts is one of 37 tribal colleges. And IAIA was established in 1962. Our academic programs include a BFA in creative writing, studio arts, and new media arts, as well as a BA in museum studies and indigenous liberal studies. Next semester, we will offer an MFA in studio arts, which is very exciting. So that's a new program. And our museum, the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts, is part of this college. It was established in 1972, and MOCNA is the country's only museum solely dedicated to exhibiting and collecting contemporary Native art. So you might find museums that also collect contemporary Native art or have an exhibition here and there, but MOCNA is really the country's only museum that's solely dedicated to collecting and exhibiting contemporary Native art. We have about 9,000 artworks in our permanent collection. But today we are here to have a look at our Indigenous Futurism exhibition. So this exhibition was actually co-curated by Dr. Suzanne Frick. She is an art historian here at IAIA, and Dr. Chelsea Hurst. She's a member of the Choctaw tribe in Oklahoma and recently accepted a new position at the Gilcrease Museum in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So before we actually have a look inside the gallery, I would like to share just a few thoughts about this exhibition. So why did we curate this exhibition, for example? Well, as curators, we were aware of a new trend or a new movement in contemporary Native art, an increase in artworks and exhibitions about Indigenous Futurism since about the 1980s. So more and more artists created works that present the future from a Native perspective, and works that are futuristic in style or sci-fi inspired. So this is a new trend we were really interested in further exploring. So that was the main reason why we curated this show. And our audience members might ask themselves, well, what does it mean? What is Indigenous Futurism? So the main difference between Indigenous Futurisms and non-native concepts of the future is that Indigenous futures are connected to the present and past. It's a non-linear concept of time. And many native cultures look 7 generations before and 7 generations ahead when making important decisions that affect current and future tribes. So our exhibition here, Indigenous Futurism, features artworks that embrace the use of indigenous science and cosmology as part of tribal knowledge systems and ways of life. Indigenous oral histories and artworks have been mapping out the cosmos and chronicling journeys to visits of supernatural beings from distant stars and alternate worlds for thousands of years. Several artists use sci-fi related themes to pass on oral history and cultural knowledge to younger audiences and to revive their native language. However, for many artists, Indigenous Futurism is also a way to heal from traumas of the past and present. So many of the post-apocalyptic narratives you will see in the show are often a reality for many Indigenous communities. So when we curated this show, we thought we should also use exhibition design elements to really impart a feeling of being inside a spaceship. And for the first time in many, many years, we were able to actually hire an exhibition designer, Andrew Merrill, here in Santa Fe, because we received major grant funding from the Ford Foundation and other organizations. So this is what you see in front of you on the screen. This is our lobby, and those design elements were actually created by our preparator, August Walker, in collaboration with our students. So wherever we can, we work with our students, work study students, interns, to help us with our exhibitions. So, and the screen, this element in the center of this exhibition design shows original Hubble films, the satellite recorded while flying through the universe. So we will enter our gallery. And bear with me, sometimes it's a bit tricky to navigate this space. I hope you won't get dizzy while we drive through the galleries. So the first artwork I would like to talk about, it's a work by Nicholas Garlin. He's a Tlingit artist from the Northwest Coast. And the work is titled, Things Are Looking Native, Natives Looking Wider. So as you can see here in this digital print, Nicholas Garlin juxtaposed 2 iconic images. One image, the one on the left, is a 1921 Edward Curtis photogravure and depicts a Hopi woman wearing her hair in the traditional squash blossom style. which is typical for unmarried Hopi women. And Curtis, many of you are probably familiar with his body of work, The North American Indian. This body of work actually contributed to the national fantasy that indigenous people and ways of life were disappearing. So on the right side, the second image is taken from a promotional photo for Star Wars, depicting Princess Leia wearing her hair in a style mimicking the squash blossom whirl. This artwork by Nicholas Galanin comments on common practices of the film and fashion industry to borrow from indigenous culture without asking for permission. The title speaks to consumer culture's desire to appropriate native-inspired looks while simultaneously refusing indigenous people the agency to define indigenous culture in an increasingly hybrid world. Nicholas Galanin is best known for his works that address issues such as appropriation and commodification of culture. And when you look to the left, you will see another digital photograph depicting also a Hopi woman with a similar hairstyle. It's not a blossom, a squash blossom, but a butterfly whirl. So many of our artists in this show actually use the imagery from Star Wars, Princess Leia with her iconic hairstyle, to really make viewers, our guests, aware of the fact that especially the film industry and the fashion industry are frequently borrowing from tribal cultures, really without giving credit or asking for permission. So appropriation of native culture is a huge problem that affects many, many tribal members, especially artists who will never get credit for their works, for their creation. So we can, George Lucas, when asked about the fact why he borrowed from Hopi culture, why he borrowed the hairstyle for the Princess Leia character, he actually defended himself and said, well, there were many, many different sources. I not only looked at the Hopi culture, but also at Mexican revolutionary soldiers. And so he claims that this hairstyle is also partly inspired by Mexican Revolution Colonel Clara de la Rocha, who wore large buns on either side of the face, similar actually to Hopi women. So the work on the left, I just want to briefly mention, this artist is DNA photographer Will Wilson, and he collaborated with an augmented reality company and customized an app. So when you download the app on your private device, on your cell phone, and you screen his photographs, and then the portrait person comes to life. In this case, the young Hopi woman will say a sentence that's similar to what Princess Leia said in her plea to Obi-Wan Kenobi via hologram in R2-D2. But in this case, since the main character here is a Hopi woman, he addresses actually Pope, who was famous leader of the Pueblo revolt in 1680. So this young Hopi woman says, Pope, years ago you served the people in the Pueblo revolt in 1680. This is our most desperate hour. Pope, you are our only hope. So many artists in this exhibition you will see both from Star Wars and Star Trek to make people aware of issues like cultural appropriation. So since this young woman kind of says something similar to Princess Leia and looks similar to Princess Leia, the artist makes viewers aware of the fact that George Lucas did actually borrow from, not only from Hopi culture, from many native tribal cultures without permission and without consulting with these tribes. So many of the artists here in this exhibition also use cutting-edge technology, which is part of Indigenous Futurism. So many artists embrace cutting-edge technology also to secure a space in cyber world, in modern technology. That's very important to them. So we will continue our tour here through the gallery and stop in front of a group of paintings here, especially on here. So this is a painting by Dene artist Ryan Singer. Like other artists in the show, Ryan Singer addresses environmental issues with his work. So in this painting, the scene is reminiscent of Star Wars: The Force Awakens, featuring a fallen Star Destroyer Imperial battleship in sand dunes of Jakku. And the fallen spaceship here contrasts with the elderly Navajo woman herding sheep through the desert you will see here in the foreground. The fallen spaceship also symbolizes waste eroding in the desert. So the Navajo Nation is located in a desert-like area. And some of you might know that one of the major issues, not only the Navajo, but also our Pueblo communities are dealing with are abandoned uranium mines. So there are, for example, more than 500 abandoned uranium mines on the Navajo Nation alone. So this starship, the fallen Star Destroyer, symbolizes waste eroding in the desert, including mining equipment and uranium fallout from mines or other environmental issues facing indigenous people. Ryan Singer has been creating Indigenous Futurism works for more than 20 years. So he is actually one of the leading artists, best known for this kind of style. And he always includes elements from his own tribal culture. So in this case, the two women herding sheep. Some of the imagery or symbolism he uses in other works are also sometimes very personal. For example, this figure here on the left is sitting on a blanket. That's actually a blanket from his own childhood. And there are some humorous elements in some of his paintings, like calendars distributed from the Navajo Energy Department or the Folger's Cafe. So he says in his artist statement, those are elements you will find in most Navajo families. So we don't have time really to look at every single artwork, but I just wanted to show you these two works. On the left side, it's work by Rory Wegmap. On the right side, it's a cape-like fabric work by Cherokee artist Lucien Hill. And both works were worn during performances. So several of these artists we have in our show here are also performance artists, and I just wanted to show you a short sequence of Lucien Hill's performance. So you see actually the artist is covered by this cape-like fiber artwork and is moving slowly through the space as if this cape comes to life. So when you look closer at this artwork, Lucille's work is actually created using leaf-like silhouettes that were dyed with cochineal a natural dye from female beetles found in the Americas. And she cut leaf-like figures. So when you have a really close look, you will actually see they are in the shape of a female figure. And that's inspired by ancient depictions of a female goddess. And she used 6,956 silk figures, female figures, that reflect the numbers of Native American women who are sexually assaulted each year. These leaf-like silhouettes were dyed with the natural dye from the female beetle, the cochineal, that is found in the Americas. And the figures are also layered in. So 3 leaves form one unit. And the symbolism for this number is, she says, Native women are 3 times more likely to be assaulted than other women in the United States. And the majority of the assaults are by non-Native men. So each trio forms a unique cluster resembling feathers and is attached to the cloak, metaphorically unifying the women into a mantle of protection. So she uses this ancient goddess, the figure of this ancient goddess, who guides and empowers indigenous women for future challenges. So it looks really stunning, but at the same time, it's a very meaningful, very important work. On the left side, we have Daryl Chief by Ruhr University. Ruhr University is an artist from originally from Minnesota, but part of his Chippewa heritage is also from on his father's side, Lakota. So this work actually combines design elements from both tribes. In addition, of course, the inspiration came from this Star Wars character, Daryl Chief. This part, as I mentioned, this work was also worn during a performance, and so the artist actually wears this costume, and in addition wears a lightsaber, and sometimes he invites children to participate in a workshop. And so the goal is really to fight the offensive use of mascots, especially in sports teams. So his motto is "Kill the idiot, save the fan." So he encourages children, Native children, to dress up. Also, we use the lightsaber to fight the offensive use of Native mascots in the sports industry. And then when you have a closer look, you see that the aluminum cast shoulder piece is embellished with red, white, and black design that evokes Lakota quill work, and the aluminum knee protectors are inlaid with Anishinaabe or Ojibwe floral pattern made of glass. We have more large-size installation works on the opposite side. I will come a bit closer. So these 2 figures are created by Virgil Ortiz, a well-known artist who is member of the Cochiti Pueblo tribe here in New Mexico. And they are called Aoki on the left and Li Tho on the right. And these 2 characters are part of his screenplay Revolt 1680-2180. So again, here we have an artist referring to the important history of the Pueblo communities here in New Mexico, the Pueblo Revolt of 1680. At the same time, he envisions the revolt to be continued in the future. So he says in his artist statement, in the future, 500 years from now, there will be still a need to defend the Pueblo communities from intruders. And each of his characters has specific attributes, characteristics, and is part of his storyboard. So, for example, Taoki and Letho prepare here for what lies ahead, extreme warfare against the invading colonial forces. The aftermath was devastating and deadly. A fog of war could be seen from miles away. So from his artist statement, you probably noticed that he speaks sometimes in the past and sometimes looks into the future. And this is really characteristic for Indigenous Futurisms. As I mentioned at the beginning, Indigenous Futurism is non-linear. So it happens in the past, in the present, and in the future. So there is no linear timeline. Everything happens simultaneously. So he also explains about these two figures. They're forced to wear gas masks and oxygen tanks around their necks to survive. In the background, you see, I'm back. A video is also part of this installation. So Virgil Ortiz also works with a videographer, and I will try to start the video. And it's really fantastic when you stand in the gallery, you hear sounds he composed, kind of eerie sounding sounds. And then our visitors can read about the Pueblo Revolt from 1680 and in the future 2180. Forward a little bit. So his figures really come to life, and he works with models, and all of these costumes are created by him. And with each exhibition, he creates new works. Up here, because we have more to see. We bought two works from the Denver Art Museum for this show, and I will just drive you around the corner so that you can have a look. Yeah, it's a bit tricky to maneuver here. Okay, so these are so-called trackers. On the left side is the male tracker. On the right side is the female tracker. She's called Tracker Mapuana. The tracker, he explains, is physically a giant. He's a protector and bodyguard. He is also a great hunter, and he's known for taking out danger silently from the shadows. His female companion, Tracker Mapuana, is a seer. She has the ability to track the enemy, cyborgs, and beasts. So again, these are not only fantastic looking works of ceramic, really masterfully designed. The design elements are sometimes borrowed from his Cochiti Pueblo heritage. They also have characteristics and are part of his storyboard. So he became best known for this body of work, and the Denver Art Museum has a larger collection of these kind of sci-fi figures. Just want to show you this female figure real quick. Okay. Hope you don't get busy here. Those white circles here on the ground are actually stops, and there is none directly in front of hers. So this is really sad because the surface of this ceramic figure is just fantastic. So she really looks interesting. So her name is Taoki. And Taoki guides the Venusian soldiers. So all of these characters you have seen before are called Venusian soldiers. And she guides them on their journey to seek new land to inhabit it. So after this terrible revolt of 1618 and simultaneously the one of 2118, there's a need for the population to find safe lands, and Tahoki, this female figure you see in front of you, her main job is to guide them to safety. And she also aids them in rebuilding their ways of tradition and life on sacred ground. This was Virgil Ortiz, a really leading artist when it comes to Indigenous Futurism, but also when it comes to ceramics. So he really revolutionized ceramic and pushed the boundaries and created those fantastic figures. So I would like to have a look now in the adjacent gallery. And we have to pass many, many fantastic works because our time is kind of limited here. We will make a stop in front of Susan Kite's work. And again, there is a short film that explains how to interact with this installation. You will see the artist herself in her installation piece. What's this? Yeah, that's Susan Kite. And she is a Lakota artist, currently teaching in Canada. So you see that when you move some of those braids, you create sound, but also the light changes. So before the pandemic, our guests were actually allowed to interact with this piece, but since it was kind of risky and we wanted to keep our guests safe, we stanchioned it off, and instead we show them this video that they understand how this work was meant to be perceived by the public. I will stop here and move back. I hope you can work. It's kind of cut off here on my screen. But Susan Kite collaborated with Devin Ronneberg for this piece, and it's titled Telling Rock. And the sculpture analyzes the relationships between human and non-human entities and intelligence. So Susan Kite explained that this is one of the first sculptures or installation pieces on the way to artificial intelligence. So that's her main goal. Susan and Devin want to create a work maybe sometime in the future that has artificial intelligence. And the main goal for this particular work here was to really improve the relationship between humans and computers. So for most of us, there's kind of this complex relationship. Sometimes we're excited about computers, sometimes we are really frustrated when it doesn't do what we want. So she explains, inspired by her Oglala Lakota culture and belief system, that even materials such as metals, rocks, and minerals can be capable of using willpower. So again, the computer, according to Lakota belief systems and culture, is not just a dead machine. Since it's constructed made of metals and other materials, according to Lakota belief system, these materials have the capability of using willpower, and that's part of her installation. These materials can hear, and they have listening capabilities, and so with this installation and our ability to interact and actually make this installation piece learn, she hopes to improve the relationship. So when you touch these braids and move some of those braids, not all of them, then the upper part, the top part, which consists of a computer designed by Devin Ronneberg, this installation piece actually saves that information. And interestingly, now during the pandemic, now that nobody is allowed to interact with this piece, we don't see the changes in color and sound. So this installation really depends on interaction with our guests. And it's really an exciting installation. It was actually, I think, probably the most popular when we opened this show. Really, our guests, they feel drawn to this installation. They're excited. They stand inside, move the braids, and are really excited to see how this installation reacts to the movement of the braids, and it changes colors. And so now, unfortunately, because of the pandemic, it seems to be kind of frozen. It doesn't have this interesting change of sequences anymore. So we don't see many changes. Then the last piece I would like to show you is titled The Keeper, a work by Santiago X. So this is the cube here. And Santiago X has a background in architecture. He was an award-winning native architect, and he actually, one of his last works was a public commission by the city of Chicago, and the work he constructed and designed was based on his tribal heritage. He's part Koshuta and part Tamamoro. So the work he created for the city of Chicago kind of resembles like one of the ancient mound buildings. But this work here, The Keeper, combines video and sound installation art with architectural forms, for example, the cube, magically creating a space without walls. The projected view of clouds gives viewers the illusion of standing in front of a sky portal while listening to a soundtrack of the artist's young daughter speaking her native language. So it's really a beautiful experience standing in front of this space without walls, this portal to the sky. Unfortunately, here on the screen, it's really doesn't give you the impression you will have when you stand in the gallery. But when he came here to install the work, he actually told us that he found it very interesting that our city of Santa Fe has so many Spanish colonial revival architecture. And he was really inspired and dedicated the Keeper to our museum because of that, because of our colonial history, which is still evident through our architecture. So the Keeper really celebrates indigenous knowledge and life ways, unlocking space without walls. So he really felt there was a need here because of our colonial history and architecture to offer this space without walls in a future that breaks free of the walls we construct for ourselves. So this was the last piece I wanted to show you. And I really want to invite you to go to our website and try out this virtual version. Our Indigenous Futurism show is still open until January 3rd, and then we will deinstall it and open a new show. But it will be available online for a long time. So I would like to open it up to questions you may have. I'll just go back to the main gallery so that you can have a look around. Yeah. I hope you enjoyed my tour through Indigenous Futurism. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Well-Off-Man, and also to Winoka and the team at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts for this incredible exhibition. I feel particularly privileged to be able to view it online during the pandemic. So thank you all so much for your work. We invite all of our attendees to posting questions that you have in the chat. Camilla and I also have questions. So as you're kind of coming up with questions that you have, we'll go ahead and sort of start, if that's okay with you, Dr. Well-Off-Man.
Oh, sure. Go ahead.
Absolutely. So our first question is, we're thinking about colonization overall. So we're curious about how do you connect Indigenous histories around colonization to Indigenous futurism?
Yeah, that's a really good question. As I mentioned, so for many tribes, Indigenous futurism means going back and forth and being in the present simultaneously. So there are several works in this exhibition show that artists often use Indigenous futurism also, or imagery from sci-fi films and themes as a way to heal from the traumas of the past and present. So they say because sci-fi images borrowed from popular culture are easily recognizable by mainstream society, they can be really powerful in addressing difficult issues such as colonization, racism, gender issues, environmental catastrophes. So they're very much aware of the popularity of sci-fi films like Star Wars or Star Trek, and some of those characters they are then used to make people aware of issues in Indian country, especially appropriation of culture or and histories of injustices in history or gender issues. So we for example, recently had many artworks. They were created because artists felt we need to make the public aware of the abuse of Native women. So, for example, when you remember Lucien Hill's work talks about this, but it was an entire new trend. So many artists created works addressing the issue of abuse of Native women, the missing and murdered Native women. So these issues, it's often easier to talk about it using motifs from popular culture, and that's one of the reasons why artists often use images from sci-fi images or cartoons or to address those really serious issues in Indian country.
Thank you so much. As a personal sci-fi fan, that makes complete sense to me, just in ways that I've engaged with art, culture, and media, specifically through a sci-fi lens, talking about social justice and difficult topics, really. So thank you very much for that answer. So our next question is, students and faculty at Georgia Tech participate in numerous teams focused on cutting-edge research for the future. So, for example, we have folks who work and study in aerospace engineering and environmental engineering, just as some examples. So how can these community members start to decolonize their ways of knowing and creating, and potentially include Indigenous ways of knowing into their curriculums and ethical imaginings of research and science?
Yeah, that's an important question. So as I mentioned before, an important aspect of Indigenous futurism is an awareness and embrace of Indigenous science and cosmology. which includes insights about the cosmos, flora and fauna, and other things. Indigenous cultures from different parts of the world also have been mapping out the cosmos for thousands of years. You see images, artworks depicting alternate worlds, visits from alternate universes to our world here. And today we have more and more indigenous scientists, engineers, astronauts, who often include indigenous knowledge in their daily work. And it's really important to reach out to these scientists. For example, for my Indigenous Futurism show, I reached out to Dr. David Begay. He's Navajo, and he's also adjunct faculty at Northern Arizona University in Flagstaff in the Department of Physics and Astronomy. Because he's also a cultural consultant, and it was important, with every show we do here, we include specialist experts in the field or in the specific theme we are talking about in our exhibitions. And for example, for my upcoming show, it's a show about nuclear exposure and uranium exposure and the effects on indigenous communities worldwide. I will work with a team of indigenous artists, curators, and scientists. And the reason why we do that is not only because we are in a native institution and museum, but the contributions these experts make are often the key to success because of their knowledge. And I really encourage also your departments to reach out because of the knowledge and the contributions they can bring to your projects. Just an example, when I started working on the uranium show, I was really surprised and had no idea that the native scientists working on uranium, the effects of uranium on tribal members and communities, that there has been this knowledge for thousands of years. For example, we know today that uranium destroys part of the DNA, but these communities living close to the uranium deposits, their traditional food includes blue corn, which has been proven to actually reverse the damage. And this knowledge has been there for thousands of years, and nobody just paid attention to it. And one of my artists is a biologist, and she was hired by the University of New Mexico as an artist in residence. So she's artist and biologist. Because of her skills, her works actually depict the problems these communities have with uranium. As I mentioned, we have more than 500 uranium mines on the Navajo Nation alone. The problems often are not properly addressed. There's an increase in cancer. And because so many communities here are very conservative and not really, because of their culture, open to discuss the effects on their tribal members, this young artist created a body of work using her own knowledge, not only as a biologist, but as an indigenous person, to help these patients to open up and to talk about symptoms, which is then, of course, key to healing. So these experts can bring so much to the table that really can be the important keys to the success of the project. So I really encourage all departments to reach out, and if you're not sure where to start, you can just call the tribal office or tribal college, and it's a small, closely connected world, and I'm sure you will find great partners for your project. So I really learned a lot working with indigenous experts, in this case scientists, environmentalists, And I think it's important because it really will help to succeed in your projects.
Thank you so much for that. So it really sounds like the answer goes beyond just active awareness, but to active inclusion and active centering of these experts, and as well as Native.
That's important.
And I actually think your answer brings us really well into our next question, which is, you've talked about appropriation, and even though cosmological knowledge and indigenous sciences have been known in tribal and indigenous communities for centuries and millennia, from your perspective, why has this knowledge been excluded from our conceptualization of the future through popular media?
Yeah, I think the problem is that, especially Western science didn't take indigenous science seriously and considered it as myth or folklore because it is not taught at our universities unless non-native science, scientists discover something native tribes knew for centuries. And I just gave you some examples like, the blue corn and the amount of zinc it contains helps actually, with the healing process. And so this knowledge has been there, but because it's not being taught, that's the main issue. And our Western universities, scientists don't take it necessarily seriously, which is a mistake, of course. It's really fascinating the more you look into indigenous science. And again, an example is the upcoming uranium show. For example, there have been creation stories in many native cultures, especially here in the Southwest. In a DNA creation story, for example, people were given the choice to choose between two yellow powders. They were asked to choose between the yellow dust of corn pollen but were instructed to leave the other yellow powder uranium in the soil and never to dig it up. Because if they do, if it were taken from the ground, they were told a great evil would come, which is true when you look at the cancer rates here, especially among tribal members living close to those mines. So this knowledge has been there, but because it's not being taught in universities, it has been excluded. When it comes to appropriation, that is often a problem, especially when it comes to fashion and film industry. And it's a huge problem for our indigenous artists because they create these works, and like all other artists, they depend on their art for a livelihood. But it's getting, just taken, stolen, and they never see any income from that, and they're not even asked for permission. So that's also a huge problem.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. We're kind of coming up to the end of our time, so we wanted to make sure that we wrapped up with some resources. So please make sure that you visit the Student Diversity Program's website that has the context link in it to get more information. Dr. Well-Off-Man has shared a selected bibliography with us. The link to the virtual exhibit will also be there, as well as the link to all of the artist statements, which are also available on the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts website. So it's really a link to get you to their website. We also encourage you to support the museum in any way you can. Visit the museum store. There are tons of publications, as well as a catalog featuring the Indigenous Futurisms exhibit. So if there isn't anything else, I want to thank you all for joining us today, and thank you especially to Dr. Well-Off-Man for a really enlightening and thought-provoking presentation. We have recorded this session if you'd like to revisit it at any point. And like we said, the virtual exhibit is available online so that you can interact and view the works at a deeper level. Thank you all so much, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And if there are any questions, please feel free to email me. My email address is on our museum's website.
Yes, absolutely. The folks at the museum are super responsive and really enthusiastic. about answering questions. So thank you all so much for being here and for the wonderful presentation. Have a good one, y'all.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.